Hello and welcome to the SCI Guys, the show where we talk about the crazy, weird and wonderful stories from the science world. I'm Corey, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Jamp and Luke Cotforth.
Hi.
And
Hi.
special guest, Laura.
Hey!
Yes, that's me. Hi.
This week, we're talking about autism. I didn't think of a pun because I didn't want to be offensive.
Oh, it's the most normal intro of a SCI Guys episode ever.
But first, we need to thank all of our patrons. Say a big thank you to our patrons.
Thank you, patrons.
Thank you, patrons. You can join our Patreon at patreon.com/SCI Guys. But why don't we start with a question as well? Are you neurodivergent or neurotypical? Let us know in the comments on YouTube. Head to YouTube, let us know in the comments. Should we start the show?
I'm still trying to find out.
Look, I think I've got the answers for you, buddy. So, what is autism? That is a question for all of you. Who wants to answer?
Oh, don't ask me.
Hands up. Go on.
I would put my hand up, but I don't feel like anybody really knows what autism is. I can kind of give a vague explanation from my end and my understanding of it.
Yeah, go for it.
But I have autism and I still don't know. And I think a lot of neurodivergent people probably relate to not knowing exactly what it is. But I can give a brief synopsis because I guess it's a disability. It's a disorder that is classified under a learning disability, developmental disorder. And for me, it's very evident because I'm only 5'1". So, clearly some development stopped. I haven't grown.
Is one of the symptoms of autism being short?
No. It is genetic.
You're
God,
thinking
there are a lot of
autistic
things.
people.
You're thinking of children, Luke. That's what you're thinking of.
Oh.
Massive
I
symptom of
always
being a
thought
child is being
all-
short.
I always thought all children had autism. Because they're all so
To
short.
be fair, a lot of people do think that autism kind of just stops and you grow out of it, and adults don't have autism. It's very commonly misunderstood to just be like a kid's thing, but I'm an adult, I have autism, and I'm sure that there's a bunch of autistic adults listening right now.
A couple,
but,
right?
Yeah.
At least let us know in the
couple.
comments if you are. You probably already
Are
have.
any of you guys neurodivergent as well, or are you guys neurotypical?
Shall I tell you
Jury's
my
still
story?
out. Jury's still out.
So-
Yeah, Luke, tell us your story.
So I have this story. So
Okay.
I was wondering whether I might be autistic, and I won't get into the various reasons as to why, but I call the doctor and I'm like, okay, hi. So this is something I'd like to talk about. I've always felt like I felt different in some way, but I never really knew why, because I'm pretty functional. And I feel like I might be autistic. And this was started because I was having a conversation in which I felt like I was being perfectly polite. I felt like I was trying to be kind and trying to be good, and I was offending people. Someone said to me, well, Corey said to me, well, people with autism sometimes experience that. Have you ever considered that? And I was like, well, I actually did some tests online, which is not necessarily a perfect test for it, but and it always came up consistently like, yeah, maybe. But
Yeah, probably. You should get tested.
it was pretty conclusive actually, those tests. But I call the doctor and I'm like, okay, so this basically happened. It's all sparked. It's all sparked because of these conversations where I was upsetting people. And the doctor, she goes to me, have you considered that maybe you might just be a rude person who's trying to get away with being a rude person by getting an autism diagnosis? And I was
my God.
What? Maybe.
Yeah.
A doctor said
That's why I got my diagnosis, actually. When I was 2 years old, I was such a rude child. My mom was like, she's going to have something as a little bit of a backup. She can't get away with this
An
forever.
excuse.
We're
yeah.
gonna need to come up with something so people don't think we're awful people,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
So, yeah,
to
that
be
was
fair,
that.
a lot of autism parents, that's one of the things that my parents walked into, obviously, raising me and having to take me into public, as you do with your child sometimes. There were always issues of people not understanding quite what was wrong with me and why I was behaving in a certain way. So yeah, it can offer some explanation, but it's not an excuse. I try not to hide behind it. I try to still be aware of my social abilities where possible, because I want to make people feel comfortable, but I mean, it's not my job to seem neurotypical, obviously, and to make people feel comfortable if it is at the expense of my own like well-being. But if I can, I still try. And I will be honest, I'm the first person to struggle to converse with sometimes other autistic people.
It is interesting that you mentioned that, and that is something that I wanted to get onto later, so we might bring it up later on. But it's the it seems that some of the, when you look up sort of signs of autism or some problems that people with autism face, which, and I'll get into this in a second, that some of them seem to come not from having autism or being autistic, so much as it's being autistic in a world where autistic people are treated in a particular way, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So a lot of, like, if you're autistic, you have a higher risk of mental illness. So that could also come from just having a really difficult, having a difficult childhood due to not being sort of raised properly, if that makes sense, right?
Accommodated for.
Exactly.
Not having a support network that really caters to your specific issues.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people have said this, but I think that if we isolated everybody on Earth, nobody would have the diagnosis, because autism symptoms only come into play when you have to either perform certain tasks or interact with other people, or there's pressure from outside. I think there are things that you would have like regardless, but you wouldn't be able to, because if you're not comparing it to somebody else, to another person's experience, then there's no issue. Like the issue only arises when you're not able to keep up with other people. Or clashing with other people because of your specific set of difficulties. So, yeah, it's interesting in that regard. I think that most of the real symptoms are based on living in a neurotypical world, so to speak.
I mean, I think it's interesting that you say that, because there are always, and this is always the case because no group is a monolith, blah, blah, blah. Obviously that I have to say that every single time, but no group is a monolith. So you've got different groups of people within a group that have quite vastly different views on it. So there are some people that, so earlier on you mentioned that, you know, like being autistic, having autism is a disability. Other people would say, I disagree with that. I find that offensive. And it's fine. I'm not saying don't say that.
Yeah, no,
you're
I find
well
it
within your
offensive
right
when
to
people say, I find it really offensive when people say it's not a disability, because for me that invalidates my experience.
Exactly,
and my struggles with it. Yeah, so that's really upsetting for me. And I find that a lot of people that find it, or that are very strongly saying it's not a disability, it's a gift, those are the autism mums most of the time. They're like people like,
That's so true.
we gotta talk about autism mums, but I don't think that that's a healthy thing at all. And I used to kind of see it in that way too, where I thought, you know, oh, it makes me special, or it gives me specific gifts, or it makes some things easier, but it really doesn't. Like, maybe it makes me function in a different way, but and there are technically benefits to my autism, and I probably wouldn't be able to do certain things a certain way if I didn't have autism. But that's just, everybody has a combination of so many characteristic and individual like parts and experiences that make up who they are as a person. To say that the autism is like a part of that and like gives you something, I think it really invalidates the hard work that somebody has to do to compensate for being autistic and the struggles that it comes with. And I think it's the same thing where people say, oh, you know, every good artist needs to, as an artist, if people aren't aware, my main gig is illustration. Believe it or not, I'm not a full-time artist. I mean, I am, but, you know, I do other things sometimes. I'm an artist and an autist.
Your accent makes both of those words sound almost exactly the same.
I'm so sorry. Yeah. I illustrate. I'm an illustrator. But people always say like, oh, you need to be tortured, or you need to have like a mental health issues in order to make good art.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing. It's like, no, it's not. Like, maybe, yes, it influences the way that you are able to create things, but to say that, you know, those things, you need those things, or to say that, oh, it's good that you have that issue because now you can make better art, or you can function in a way that you can see the world in a more beautiful way. I think that's so toxic, and I think that's so bad. I used to be
very identified with my depression and thought if I cured my depression, I wouldn't be able to make art. And then I was like, hang on, that's my depression talking. I know what you're doing there, buddy. You're trying to get me to not fix you.
Look, I'm a part of you. You can't get rid of me. I am you, buddy. You know, like... Of course it's going to say that.
The moment I realized that was rubbish, I was like, oh my God, I've been listening to you this whole time.
But like equally so, I think the interesting thing with being neurodivergent as opposed to being like having a mental illness, because there are differences there. Is that like being neurodivergent isn't something that you can sort of get rid of or cure, right? And even the notion that that there is sort of a cure is an iffy one, right? Whereas a mental illness, obviously, you can treat mental illnesses because in a lot of cases there's something going on with your brain that is causing said like sort of non-normative behavior.
Yeah.
Whereas a neurodivergence is the way that it's usually described is a brain being just wired sort of differently.
Yeah,
which to an extent,
you can see a difference in a brain of an autistic person and somebody with ADHD, for example. But that difference to a lot of people on the spectrum and a lot of neurodivergent people is really not clear. People still think that autism is mental illness and ADHD is mental illness, and it's just not the case. It's just we're different. Like it's like missing a leg, but the leg is your brain cells functioning in a certain way.
No. It's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, because for example, I would say depression or something like that. Everybody can get depression later on in life, but nobody can develop autism spontaneously. You can't catch it. You can. I mean, I guess in a way, like you can miss a leg later on in life, but you can't like you can only. You can't
suddenly later on in life growing an extra, be born without a leg.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's the sort of born this way idea, essentially. Whereas, it makes sense. Let's just hop back to what autism is. I've got a little definition here.
Okay.
It was a very... This all came out of what autism is.
It's the biggest prelude to a definition ever.
Right? Great. No, it's fantastic. So the definition I have here, and this is a quote, it says, autism is a set of heterogeneous neurodevelopmental conditions characterized by early onset difficulties in social communication and unusually restricted repetitive behavior and interests. That I was really struggling to find a definition for autism that was like, this is the one that didn't come off as ableist and one that wasn't just a bit nonsense. This is, I think, one of the better ones that I've found, because it isn't infantilizing or necessarily insulting. It's fairly to the point, right?
Yeah.
So
very limited, though. Like that's so specific.
Yeah,
a lot of autistic people don't have those limited interests. Like we have special interests, and we can get that focus. But it is characterized by those things, and is used to diagnose and to like navigate it, but the actual issues inside the brain are different. Because I would always explain it as like a processing disorder, and that's why the way that your development is affected as well. But the real crux of the issue, or like the disability for me, is the way that I process information and sensory input, and that affects everything else. Because every little bit of information that comes into your brain, whether it's information, whether it's social interaction, sensory input, everything like that, a neurotypical brain, and this is how I can always explain it, the easiest way for people to actually understand it. A neurotypical brain knows how to prioritize and knows how to sort those things normally. An autistic person isn't able to do that. So everything becomes more difficult, and everything becomes potentially more overwhelming because of it. So this is why social things become more difficult, because if I'm having a conversation with somebody, I have to manually check their expressions. I have to check what I'm doing. I have to check whether I'm making eye contact. I'm making appropriate facial expressions. Those things aren't like wired into my brain naturally. So I've been taught a lot of those things, and I've automated a lot of those things as well. But it still takes a lot more energy. And then on top of that, unpredictability, like things like sensory input, like I can deal with that now. But when I was younger, like obviously I didn't have the ability to prioritize information coming in and the information that I'm supposed to put out. And you can learn to do those things like any other person can. It will just take longer, and that's why there's a developmental delay. But I think that's the best way that I can explain it. I don't really identify with the fact that, I'm an illustrator and I like to work on my drawings, and I have video games as an interest because I'm autistic. Like some autistic people like horses, some autistic people like cooking or science or maths or whatever. It's so varied. I feel like that's just too limiting.
I absolutely agree with you there. So I think the difference in these definitions is the one that I've given is almost more diagnostic, right? In that it's not necessarily about the experience or the, I guess, the actual thing itself. It's more about how it is characterized, how we would decide whether someone is autistic or not from a diagnostic perspective. And I think what's really interesting about what you said is that the sort of where it all sort of stems from for you in terms of the processing. I think that's honestly something that would really help it make sense to people listening that don't get it, because that is something that I didn't get for a very long time. Because when you look at this is the issue when we talk about specifically sort of neurodivergence, I think, really more than sort of mental illness. But with neurodivergence, we tend to look at it diagnostically. We look at it from someone that is neurotypical or someone that, is not neurodivergent in that particular way, looking at this thing and being like, what is going on? And looking at autism from the outside, what's going on? It doesn't. How do these things link? Like, there's sensory processing issues. There's like, you can have special interests. How do these things
can
link
seem
together?
Like a bunch of unrelated things.
Yeah, like
at the same time.
But until I started looking up autism or reading into it, I was just like, autism is just these eclectic things, just because that's what autistic people are like, right?
Can I just check and understand? So when you're talking, Lara, about the kind of like sensory processing or like general information processing, where a neurotypical person's brain sort of, the way I understood it, what I got from it was like almost like a neurotypical person's brain is able to create a hierarchy of importance automatically, of like, this information is important in this sense, and this information we can disregard automatically. Whereas an autistic brain is more likely to be unable to give a hierarchy of importance to different inputs. Yeah,
it just piles on, and that's why it can be so overwhelming to suddenly have to shift gears, and that's why we seem really rigid. Even though I consider myself quite a spontaneous person, and I enjoy things like surprises and all that sort of stuff. It just depends on how much is in my head already and how much I'm already processing, whether I'm able to handle it or not. And that's why to a lot of people that seems really unpredictable, and to a lot of people that doesn't seem to make sense with autism. But it's just like, to me, it's completely logical. And I had conversations with my mom about this, because even people working with people with autism, like in my school where I eventually ended up dropping out, I didn't go to high school because of this, because my autism was too unpredictable. Like, teachers would literally say, no, it doesn't make sense, because they just went by the diagnostic thing, and they went, oh yeah, you're just supposed to like fit this very specific idea of autism. But like, then they were just surprised that it didn't fit that, like, that spontaneity that I still had, if that makes sense. But to me, it makes total sense that it's just information that comes in, and I need to have space to be able to not get freaked out and get overwhelmed, because then I will just have a meltdown or a shutdown or any of those things. Basically a fight or flight response, which is a completely normal thing, and everybody has that. Meltdowns of an autistic person aren't like specific, like special autism meltdowns. They're the same thing, except we're pushed there a lot easier than a neurotypical person.
It's like if your tank is full, it's going to overflow and result in like a meltdown. It's just your tank is going to be probably more full more often because you can't prioritize. Yeah, that makes sense. And
it's going to be filled by stuff that you guys wouldn't even consider filling. Stuff that, you have just a lot of
like, I'm not
logical like processes to be able to delegate what information is important, to be able to put it aside. For me, I have to like hold on to it until I can adequately like sit down and process it properly. So it fills up a lot quicker, even if it's something that is completely normal to do. Like, for example, having to plan my day, or having to do laundry a certain way, or I don't know. Like, it can be anything. Like, it's so vague, and giving examples is what kind of leads conversations in autism or about autism in general, because people can only give specific examples, but it can literally be everything.
Yeah. I think that's kind of why I chose the definition that I did, because, and again, I want to say this just for anyone listening or watching, obviously any example that you give, Laura, is specific to you. This is, this is not, you are not the shining example of what,
No.
you're not the shining example. You are just one single data point in, many. So the reason, I think the reason I chose this is because it's kind of spot on to what you're saying, heterogeneous neurodevelopmental conditions. Heterogeneous basically meaning varied here, right? Lots of different things.
Right.
Hetero meaning obviously different. And when it talks about restricted repetitive behavior and interests, I don't think it's necessarily meaning that autistic people as a whole have restricted interests. I think it means more on an individual sense that I think it's the way that it's trying to describe sort of special interests, as in you have something that you can sort of that you focus a lot of time and energy on.
Yeah.
Whereas, sort of, I think is it allistic people would maybe be more varied in their interests, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right?
that makes sense.
Yeah.
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 Makes sense.
I still see it with people that the special interests also come up a lot with people with ADHD nowadays, which I find interesting.
I've noticed
So this is what's
I still
difficult.
don't know.
I don't want to.
People always confuse the two, and people group them in together. But I find I don't really relate to ADHD struggles at all.
You probably
yeah,
don't have ADHD.
it's-
This is a big thing on TikTok
True.
that's actually kind of been bothering me a tiny wee bit. Is that some people on TikTok have been saying, "Oh, did you know that ADHD and autism are correlated? And these ADHD traits are actually also autistic traits. So if you have these, you aren't autistic. You might just have ADHD." No, shut up. You don't know. Go to a doctor. Have a doctor
Yeah.
diagnose. You don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to. I can't diagnose someone with ADHD or autism, and I have done a lot of reading on both of those things.
Yeah.
I have
There you
a
go.
psychopathology book sitting in front of me that I have read. I've read everything about both of those conditions in this. I'm not going to pretend that I can diagnose either of those things. There are very distinct differences. There can be overlaps in the sort of outward appearance with different reasonings for those behaviors. And there also is the big thing that there seems to be quite a comorbidity with ADHD and autism. So if you've been
You might
diagnosed
have
with
both.
exactly, if you've been diagnosed with
Yes.
ADHD and you think, I have these autistic traits, must be my ADHD. No, it's probably your
And then
autism that's
TikTok's like,
undiagnosed.
No,
Exactly.
yeah. TikTok's like, no, you're actually
Well,
autistic. Plot twist, you're both.
That's a dangerous thing, right? It's
Yeah, absolutely.
People combine the two, and people even I've had conversations with people with ADHD who are like, "Oh, I completely understand your autism struggles because I'm ADHD, so we're basically the same." And I'm like, "No, we're not the same at all." And I always kind of struggle because, I don't want to invalidate their experience and the fact that they identify, with neurodivergent struggles and identify that as a disability. But at the same time, I'm like, it is a very different thing. And maybe they're autistic as well. Maybe they're just relating to me because they're undiagnosed autistic. But at the same time, I do want to, I hate to be the gatekeeper of this, but I get a little, and I'm trying not to be gatekeepy about it, but I am apprehensive about just even that self-diagnosis and everything like that. It's such a complex issue. It's because you said as well, get diagnosed by a doctor. And I used to say that it's no, just get diagnosed, because you can't do that. You can't do that by yourself, and you can't put that on yourself, but it's still a luxury to be able to get diagnosed, of course, as well. So
Absolutely.
it's such a tricky subject, because I want people to have access to proper diagnosis, and I don't want people to feel, because self-diagnosing and trying to treat yourself and reading up about the very limited information that there is out there about autism can be really, really harmful. I know a lot of people that got freshly diagnosed even by a doctor and read up harmful information, got stuck into thinking about themselves in a certain way. I didn't even read stuff online, and I just got harmed by the limited information that even people in treatment centers have about autism, because I had a very limited view about what autism meant, and I thought that I was completely broken and I wouldn't be able to do certain things, or I wouldn't be able to trust my own brain sometimes because I was told, oh no, your experience is completely different from other people. So in my brain, especially when I was younger, I was like, oh, then that means that I can't trust my brain to understand anything that's going on in the world, because like if I can't have somebody else's feedback from the outside saying or being able to look through their eyes, you know, it's like trying to explain to a blind person what the color blue is. Like if I just have a very limited experience, and if I'm being told, oh no, it's completely different because you're autistic, then how am I supposed to trust anything, you know? So it can be really dangerous. And I think self-diagnosis is valuable, but tricky. For that
So when
issue
I say get diagnosed, I mean, I should clarify, I don't mean, like, obviously I understand that not everyone has access to diagnosis. My point is more, don't watch a few TikToks and then
Assume.
Self-diagnosis is obviously the first step to diagnosis if it's available to you. You literally cannot go for a diagnosis usually unless you think to yourself, I think I might have this thing, which realistically is a form of self-diagnosis. So
yes.
What I mean is, don't just watch a TikTok that from some kid telling you that they read that actually these two things are the same thing, and be like, oh, well then I'm just ADHD. Don't do that. Like, if you can get diagnosed, seek a diagnosis. And if you can't get diagnosed, then it is a little bit more complex. And I'm not really going to be the one to give you the advice here, but I would say that saying that I really think I am autistic, and then going on to then create content for other autistic people is maybe not the way to go, because you honestly probably don't know what you're talking about. You can always talk about your experience, but then to sort of label yourself as a certain thing and then sort of intertwine your experience with the experience of this group of people is maybe not the best way forward, right?
Out of interest, what do you think is causing the fact? I mean, maybe this is just my TikTok, but there's so much. I get recommended so much like ADHD and autism content on TikTok.
Also do I.
And like, I wonder, like, is this the algorithm doing it, or is it people realizing they might have, for example, undiagnosed ADHD, and it being more prevalent than maybe was thought, or is it just for some reason the algorithm is finding that suggesting to people who maybe have some level of attention trouble that they might have ADHD causes them to watch loads of TikTok videos about ADHD.
You're spot on. Sorry, the problem with the algorithm is that it's a self-selecting thing, right? Like, you choose, the algorithm doesn't decide to serve you anything. You watch something for a certain period of time or engage with it, and the algorithm is basically saying, oh well, other people that engage with this other stuff. Maybe this person will engage with this stuff too. I'll test it out. Like, so often on TikTok recently, I've got a single audio. I've got a TikTok audio, and then I swipe to the next TikTok, and it's that same audio, and I'm like, are you stupid, algorithm? Are you really trying to test whether I care about this audio that I spent some time on? No, I was washing my hands and I couldn't get my phone screen wet. But like, like it's. I think it's basically like people engaging with content because they find it engaging, and that just kind of leads them down that path, because a lot of other people that engage with that content also find it engaging, and people want answers for why they are the way they are.
Yeah.
So if you find something that is generally kind of relatable, you know, like, oh, sometimes I struggle to make a to-do list. If you find that relatable, and then, you know, you then get like sort of fed content that says, if you struggle to make to-do lists, you have ADHD, then you're going to start thinking that, when realistically having ADHD is a bit more than just sometimes struggling with to-do lists,
so
right?
it's the focus problems to self-diagnosing ADHD pipeline.
it's the relatable.
It is the same thing, because I immediately thought when you mentioned this, it's the tweet where somebody goes, why are all of these trans women on my Twitter? It says men about to find out why, or something. It's like, why are all these autistic people on my TikTok?
They're like
neurotypical person.
Yeah, I guess
about to find out why.
I guess my question is like, if you like, you might not be able to answer this, but is the prevalence of, because obviously the prevalence of ADHD, for example, ADHD content on TikTok, it is in part being driven by the fact that ADHD content does well on TikTok.
Yeah.
But is the demand for it by the audience because of a sudden prevalence of undiagnosed ADHD, or a built up prevalence of undiagnosed ADHD, or is it because people who just have some attention problems that isn't full blown ADHD want to figure themselves out, and they actually don't have ADHD, but they giving themselves a label to make them feel less horrible about the fact that they've got an attention problem is seductive in some way?
I think it's multifaceted.
Yeah.
I think it's people who don't understand deeply the topic that they're talking about, basically spreading misinformation,
Yeah.
which then results in a greater number of people thinking that they have ADHD than they do. And this is I think similar to the sort of trans thing, but not quite the same, because with the trans thing, there's no sort of medical trans definition, right? Okay, trans meds, go away. Okay, go away. I'm not talking to you. There is no like medical definition of you are a trans person, right? Like you could say there's the dysphoria thing, but even then that is a tough thing to sort of like that's a tough thing to really strictly define, right? So if we're going down the medical route, yeah, like maybe not everyone that gets fed that content is going to be able to meet the diagnostic criteria for gender dysphoria disorder, right? But the sort of trans experience is a little bit different from ADHD and autism and all of those different sort of neurodivergencies, because what is interesting is that with ADHD, people that don't have ADHD can experience some of the signs of ADHD occasionally, right?
Yeah.
The things and it's like what you were saying earlier, Laura, that there's nothing, there's all of these things with sort of autism and ADHD. A lot of them are just like normal, it's like ostensibly normal things that neurotypical people can experience, just to a way lesser degree, or rather wouldn't experience without extreme stress or other things going on, right? So you can watch a video that says if X thing happens to you, then you have ADHD. Now it can be true that doing X thing can be a sign of ADHD, but doing that it would not itself constitute ADHD, and just doing that occasionally would definitely not constitute ADHD, right? Like the executive.
It's like OCD as well. Like
Oh my god, it winds me up so much.
Yeah, it's really frustrating. And a lot of like even OCD has some similarities with autism because of the rigidity and like routine and all that sort of stuff. So I get that one a lot, where people are like, "Oh, I have like these limited interests, and that's why I must probably be autistic," or you know, I struggle to make eye contact, so I must be autistic. I'm like, I don't struggle to make eye contact. I'll look you in the eyes all day. Like it will be fine.
Just
like
staring up
into
at
these
people.
eyeballs. No, yeah, just I don't know. It's so limited, and it's so, the understanding of it is so, yeah, it's annoying.
So I hadn't considered
it grinds my gears.
I hadn't considered the third possible variable. It's not that there might be. It's not just that there might be a load of undiagnosed ADHD, or that people want a label for their attention issues. It's also that the people who are making stuff about ADHD and claiming it's ADHD are also getting the diagnosis of ADHD wrong.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So those three, the trifecta of
so I think there are people that are
misinformation.
undiagnosed, definitely, right? Like
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean,
There's people that are diagnosed and that are spreading misinformation
Oh,
too.
yeah.
Like
God, no,
I'm
I mean,
sure I still don't understand all of it. I definitely have spread misinformation in the past. Well, not spread it, but like had conversations with people in the past based on my limited understanding of it then. And that is like changed, and it constantly is changing. I constantly like, and I think that's a really healthy way to look at it too. Even if you have a certain diagnosis and if you have a certain understanding of what that means for you, you can grow and you can realize that some parts of you might not, like in the future, I might realize that some parts of my experience that I normally would have linked to my autism is just who I am as a person, or stuff that I find really normal might be part of my autism after all. Like,
I think this is interesting because
constant.
I don't mean to say that that it's only undiagnosed people that are spreading misinformation. In fact, I think it's kind of the opposite. I think that a lot of people that are diagnosed spread misinformation. Because someone's diagnosed, people think that means that they have a certain level of knowledge. If you're diagnosed with something, you probably have a good level of knowledge on the experiential aspects of it. The diagnostic aspects of it are out of your league, and you should definitely avoid it unless you have
Yes.
training in the qualifications.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
And people that aren't even able to give an accurate representation of why they even make the decisions they make. There's loads of studies as well. All the way back to like the 70s. There's loads of studies where like there's a piece of information that comes in subconsciously and it causes the person to make a different decision. And when asked why they made the decision, not only do they not account for the fact that that thing happened, they also didn't even notice it happen, but it affected that. I can't give you an example of that, but like our thing where we describe our experience to make sense for other people as to why we act the way we do is like super unaware about loads of the stuff.
It usually makes people come up with things on the fly.
Absolutely.
All the time.
Oh man.
To explain why.
I have a few friends who I keep saying it to them because it's just so interesting once you notice it, where like someone can have something that they want to happen and then they'll just fill in why it should happen. They fill in the gap with just a thing that doesn't have any bearing. It's like, that might not be a good argument. And then you, if you call them on it, it's like, well, that doesn't necessarily make sense. They'll come up with a different reason because what they actually want is they want for the thing to happen. Yeah. The reason doesn't matter.
No, the reason's irrelevant. This is why I love these conversations that I have with you, where we spoke about this on, I think we're on After Dark. Yeah. Our show, which you can get on our Patreon. It's not Sci Guys. It's what happens when we stop recording the episodes of Sci Guys. You should check it out. It's very good. So on After Dark, we were talking about actually spending time discussing why things are right and wrong, even though we know that they are right. Like, things are very clearly like right and wrong. Yeah. Like, I think the most egregious example was what was it? It was incest. We discussed incest and why that was wrong, because obviously
you need to clarify this. The reason for it is because if you ask someone why it's wrong, the general reasons will be because it's an evolutionary way of not having offspring that are that would be the.
I think if you
reason.
ask someone, they'll say because it's disgusting.
Yeah, sure. But then if you push into why, if you push into why, they go, well, because because there's an evolution, there's a possible genetic reason why you wouldn't want to have offspring with somebody who's a close genetic match to you, and so then you go, okay, well, what about two gay brothers? Yeah, is that weird? It still is.
It's still weird.
We all are agreed that it is. But why is it weird? Because that doesn't sit inside of your description.
I think what's really useful about that is that it really teaches you to start questioning why. Because why is a really good question. It's also a very tough question to answer honestly to yourself. Yeah. So performing this exercise where you're like, okay, well, if it's two gay brothers, well, it's weird because they were raised together. Well, what if they weren't raised together? What if they were just like genetically twins? Like,
exactly. There's no power dynamic that is completely unfair there. So that's actually that's an interesting one.
It's a fun game to play.
There are examples of that where like long lost brothers. Carry on.
Yeah. Sorry, I kind of wanted to segue into that because the one struggle that I have a lot of the time is, and something that I face a lot with my autism is that because of it being a disability, I get asked, and I've asked myself the question whether it's okay for me to date neurotypical people or whether there's a disbalance there. And I also, I get harassed by men who think that autistic women owe it to autistic men to date them because they can't interact with normal women, so to speak, neurotypical women. It's really messed up. And I've had both neurodivergent and neurotypical partners, and I always kind of struggle with answering this, and this is something that I still have to get over. I feel like and this is not the truth, but I struggle with feeling like a burden because of my disability. And I feel like I keep somebody down by needing special assistance or a little bit more time, or, not being able to be the most, attentive partner to somebody because of my disability. And that's definitely difficult. But it's the same with any disability. And the best way that I can look at it as well, and I know logically there's no way for me to feel bad about, it's an active choice that somebody makes for themselves to want to date somebody with a disability. But even if you're together with somebody and if you get married, for example, it's for better or for worse or whatever it is in English, and voor- en tegenspoed in Dutch, whatever, you never know if somebody is going to become ill in the future or if it's going to need assistance. So, having a disability and being aware of it is at least being one step ahead of like future diagnostics, because my mom didn't know that my dad was autistic until he was 55 and got diagnosed after I did.
Did your dad know?
So my dad knew because I was getting diagnosed. My diagnostic story, I should have led with that. I would have had a bit about this really early. I got diagnosed pretty late. Normally autism starts to get diagnosed around 2 years of age.
Yeah.
I started to get tested around 2 years old because my mom noticed that there were issues with me, and I exhibited a lot of the traditional signs. But when I was younger, autism was just not getting diagnosed in women as much. So it was like a boy's like disability.
Still the case,
which it still really is. And it took about 10 years for me to get my formal diagnosis when I was 12. But then because I got my diagnosis, my dad was then tested because we were like, where did it come from? Because it's a genetic thing. And my dad exhibited a lot of the signs. And he ended up getting the diagnosis really late in his life.
There was a TV show on the BBC about this where like these 3 kids were all diagnosed with autism, and the parents just suddenly go, oh. And then the mum gets tested, and she's so like she's so neurotypical presenting. But then she goes into this, she delves into it and goes, oh my God, yeah, all these things my whole life.
There's the thing about masking, right? So I think it's interesting. So it can actually be hereditary, obviously. Like there's a hereditary element to it. But that doesn't necessarily mean
it is. It's completely hereditary. You don't get it like any other way. Like you have to get it from somewhere.
Yeah, what I mean is, so it's what I'm saying is that I don't want to sort of mince my words and say that if you have it, then your parents are definitely...
One parent must have it, because you could get it
from
a grandparent, or you could get it from a great-grandparent.
Can you get it
without... So
can you get it with nobody in your lineage having had it?
This is the difficult thing. I don't actually have a specific answer to that question, so I don't know. Although this is the difficulty, right? And this is the difficulty when we talk about it, is that diagnosing autism is not great. So for one thing, generally in females, way underdiagnosed, it seems, right? Especially, it's getting better now, but way underdiagnosed. I mean, I've actually got stats here that initially they thought it was about a 4-to-1 male to female ratio, and that was in 2009 that was reported. But a meta-analysis in 2017, I think, said that the ratio was closer to 3-to-1, because, and I quote, autistic traits may be camouflaged in females, and that current diagnostic procedures may be biased against females. Essentially, autism can present differently in sort of women as compared to men, and that leads to girls and women being underdiagnosed. It's a real pain, and especially when we look at the history of autism, like back in the 60s, I think, was when it was started to being sort of known about. And I'm going to very briefly talk about something that might get YouTube to ban us, but we're going to have to quickly skip past it. So back in the 60s, they thought that I'm pretty sure they thought that autism was caused by bad parenting or cold parenting, which led to young boys acting, and it was young boys, it wasn't little girls, it was young boys acting in a specific way. And then they were thinking about treatments and stuff for that. And then back in, I think, when was it? Was it the 90s? I think it was the 90s or noughties. I can't remember. A lovely man who we all love, a doctor who is no longer a doctor, decided that a certain preventative medical intervention was causing autism.
Is the one that's 3?
Yes,
but it's not 3. It's 1.
It's not 3.
It's 3 that's a combined.
I'd say go and watch the episode. But you can't, because YouTube took it down. You can go and listen to it on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. Jamp, remember which number it was?
29.
29. Go listen to episode 29 on Apple, Spotify, or any other audio platform. Can't watch it on YouTube.
Can't listen to it anywhere else.
So, and because autism basically starts presenting at 2 years old, which is roughly the same time as this medical intervention, a lot of parents would see the signs of autism and be like, this is happening just after this medical intervention. Therefore, this medical intervention caused the autism. And like, this is what's really frustrating to me about like just looking into autism. And this is why I don't want to do just one episode on it. I need to do literally like at least 3 more, because I want to do one on like the history. I want to do one on like misconceptions in general, because autism as a thing, as a thing that exists, has been plagued by misinformation and misunderstanding since its very conception. Like the very diagnostic model of autism has been born out of this like completely ridiculous viewpoint of parents just being bad and making kids autistic. And then like it comes to Asperger's. Yeah, like it comes to Asperger's, wherein like Asperger's was a thing until like 2013 when the DSM-5 came out. Do you know what Asperger's is? It's autism, but without the sort of your speech and language being affected. A lot of people basically come away from it.
Which is my original diagnosis, but I now I don't identify with that because it doesn't make any sense. Like it's not separate. It's
autistic,
not a
but
different
smart,
experience.
basically.
Yeah,
right?
like that's such a weird thing. Like you can have learning disabilities, or you can just be dumb and have autism, or you can be smart and you can be autistic. Like, why are those things? Why does it have to be a separate diagnosis? And I didn't really identify with Asperger's either, because I'm highly intelligent and I have good language like skills, but I still have selective mutism and I still have language issues. They're just presenting in a different way, and that's why I originally got diagnosed with Asperger's. But that doesn't, like, it just got me set up with like a bunch of stereotypical like things that people expected from me, because now they expected me to be good at maths. I'm not good at it. Like they expected me to be like, I don't know.
Can you
they
not
expect
build
me
a
to be
computer
socially
from scratch?
awkward. Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
So that's boy autism.
For the
Boy
right-
autism is
boy
boy
autism.
autism is
Build
computer
from
is
scratch.
computer and trains.
Oh.
Girl autism
Yes.
is not exist.
Oh.
Right?
Does
Yeah.
not exist. Or horses. I do have to say, I do have a really big obsession with Minecraft. I hate myself for it, but Minecraft is my love. It's my life.
I
That
love-
sounds
I
more
love
like
that
boy
you-
autism to me.
I love that
Have you
you've
considered
basically
you might be boy? Might be boy.
I might be boy.
Might be boy.
Am I
Maybe.
boy? Maybe I am.
check
I'm going to
that.
spiral now. My Twitter timeline is going to be...
You're going to see some TikTok videos.
Oh,
be
cool.
Like,
So you
are
can
you
come-
autistic, but you also like Minecraft? Nah, you're just trans.
That is
Why
what
are there so
TikTok
many trans men on my
do
feed?
not do that. Oh my god, what I feel like
I'm going to clip that.
no,
and stick it on
I
our
think I'm
TikTok.
gonna make it. I think I'm gonna start our TikTok with that. I'm gonna do a TikTok with that in it. But I think that it's really interesting that you say that you were initially diagnosed with Asperger's, because like, as I say, since 2013, since the DSM-5 came out, it combined all of those different diagnoses that would have fallen under autism beforehand. What I've got here is Rett's disorder, Asperger's, childhood disintegrative disorder, and those and a bunch of others were just combined into autism spectrum disorder in 2013. And the reason for that is, I mean, there's just not much research supporting the differentiation between the categories. And like I said, like Asperger's specifically, this is one that kind of is tough because it really brings in the concept of high functioning, which is in itself a very sort of problematic view of any neurodivergence, because it's kind of what you were saying, you can be high functioning in a particular area but be low functioning in another area, and even those definitions themselves, it doesn't lend itself to the actual experience, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Like it's tough because it just doesn't really represent what's going on. I think, and this is what I've said this already, but this is what comes into it with neurodivergence. When we study it, when we diagnose it, when we look at it, we're always looking at it from the outside and looking at the sort of results of things, and we're not looking at the root cause of those behaviors. And that then just becomes problematic because we start deciding, but this person is smart, so they're not like all of the other autistic people that we have diagnosed. Let's give them a new type of autism for only smart people. Imagine, right? Like imagine, let's say we took depressed people and we chopped them up between
this
dumb
person
depressed
is
people
smart
and
depressed
smart depressed
person.
people. And if you were smart depressed,
So
you didn't have depression. You had like, I don't know, a JAMPS disorder.
What?
Wow.
Asperger's is a name. I don't
Do
know.
you feel attacked?
I do feel very
I'm saying Jamp discovered that smart people can be depressed too. I would have said Luke's disorder, but that would be way too on the nose.
Well, at least you're saying I'm smart. Thank
Luke's
you.
disorder. Oh, what a compliment. I always got like, oh, you're high functioning. And to go back on the autism month thing again, they love using that. They love using it against me. They love using it to shut me up about any struggles that I face because of my autism. Because I am very vocal against harmful treatments and harmful like misinformation about autism. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people in the lives of autistic people and people even themselves diagnosed with autism that are very, very vocal about presenting this information wrongly. Whenever I speak out about anything, like whether it be an organization, misinformation, anything out there, or talk about my issues, like just in general, like whether it's issues that I face because of other people being uneducated or issues that I face by myself, my experience is invalidated because of the way that I'm able to function well according to them. And they're like, well, you don't know what you're talking about and you can't talk about that because I am a mother of a person with like that is so much more autistic than you are. And I'm like, you don't know how autistic I am. Just because I'm able to talk about stuff or able to cook my own dinner or live by myself now doesn't mean that I am less autistic than somebody else. They just have a different set of problems limiting their independence for whatever reason that there is. And usually there are a lot of things that they can do or that they can be helped with to increase their independence still. Like even there's so many people that end up people just accept that they're like nonverbal, but they are able to communicate. They're just able to communicate in a different way. Just because I don't need an iPad to communicate doesn't mean that I have no communication issues or that I didn't need to learn to communicate in a certain way or that I've always been naturally verbal to an extent where I can express myself. And that it can come up. Like I have moments where I'm not verbal and I shut down completely. I'm unable to talk. So I still face those things, but just because people get like such a small view of how I present and how I seem to function on a day-to-day basis, they think that they understand or that they think that I'm not autistic at all, and they invalidate my whole experience, and that really, really sucks. And that's why I also think high functioning is just such it shouldn't exist. We shouldn't describe anybody as high functioning because it's just a moment in somebody's life. You can be high functioning one moment and low functioning in another.
I think that's really, like I think that's, I mean, this kind of, I think I can correlate that to sort of mental health issues, right? You can be depressed, but be high functioning. And until
Sure.
there's two different. I mean, there's two main different factors to that. One, there's a kind of element of masking in, so say, neurodivergence. If we use that term and bring it over to this, like you can hide that you are depressed, right? And you would outwardly appear to be very high functioning, but you could be torn up on the inside, right? There could be so much going on that people don't see. And similarly, when it comes to sort of being neurodivergent, you can mask the sort of your neurodivergent traits and people won't notice them.
And in fact, you can be extremely depressed and extremely masking it. And you can also be kind of depressed and not able to mask the fact that you're a bit depressed. Right?
Yeah.
I know that they're not the same thing, obviously, but it's a help.
I think it's an easier way for people to understand. Yeah.
That's absolutely true. There's people that would probably look more autistic on the outside than I present, because I always get, I wouldn't have noticed at all that you were autistic because of the way that I make eye contact, because of a very limited understanding that people have of autism.
Yeah.
I get that like all the time. I get all the time that, I mean, there's probably people looking at it and being like, no, you are clearly autistic, bitch. Like, look at the way that you're moving your face. But no, like there's people who present with more like stereotypical autistic symptoms that might not even be autistic in the first place, or have less day-to-day issues than I do. Like I'm very severely autistic, and that's one thing that I always like try to explain. Like, just because I don't fit the specific
mold
idea of it,
yeah.
I do want to say like my prognosis when I was younger, my prognosis up until I was about 16, 17 was that I was going to be in a care home forever. So when I was like becoming an adult, we were looking for a permanent care home for me, like for me to live with assistance for the rest of my life. And I got out of it because of social media. I got really lucky because I was deemed 100% unfit for work because of a combination of issues with the educational system and because of my own like ability to work. But because I'm pretty talented and I got really lucky with social media, I'm able to run my own business. But if it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for my ability to run my own business, maybe I still would have been able to eventually be living in some sort of like assisted like healthcare situation, but I would always be reliant on some form of healthcare. And now I'm completely independent as of, I think it was 2020. Yeah, it was during the first year of the event. I won't mention it. I officially finished my last counseling session. I still have a case manager that checks in every now and then and make sure that if I need anything new, I can still access it. But that was completely out of the question. But yeah, like people don't see me as being disabled enough to be considered like low functioning, but I'm one of the most autistic people out there. I used to not be able to put on socks. I used to stop breathing if I got overwhelmed. Like I would literally faint in a bathtub because I was having a meltdown over something really stupid. And people don't see that within me, but I feel like I'm constantly having to explain and like excuse myself and be like having to say, no, I am really disabled, which is so tiring and so annoying. And I wish I didn't have to do that. I just want people to know, I guess, that just you don't know how high functioning somebody is based on, outward appearance. And I hope that I can explain that at least. I hope that somebody learned something from that.
I think maybe you're so spot on. It's just really great to hear you say that. Basically, it seems like what you can take from what your interactions with someone, the only thing you can understand from that is how good they are at appearing neurotypical. That is it. Whether whether that is because they don't struggle in that particular area, or whether that's because they're very, very good at masking, you don't know, right? And I think as well, what's really interesting is, and I'm going to say it many, many times, the view of these issues it's always a view from the outside. So when people hear autistic, generally, I'm sure they just picture, it's just a weird guy, just a guy that's weird and can't talk to people and really likes trains or something. Oh my God.
We have a very limited view. Like the view is still these people that are just solitary like beings that have very limited interests, that are always nerds, always antisocial. I was at a talk show in the Netherlands, and this person who got recently diagnosed was like, the talk show host asked him a question. He was like, what should we do to make other autistic people more comfortable? And this guy goes, just leave them to do their own thing all the time. Like, don't force them to go to any social events. Like, don't ask them to be part of that. And I was like, hold on a second. I love to go to like a Christmas party at my job or whatever. Like, I love to be involved with social interaction. I want to be asked for that sort of stuff. So let's just make sure that the person with autism is treated like any other person first and foremost, and then ask what you can do to them specifically to make them more comfortable or to limit their overwhelmedness, or when something is happening, like learn the signals of how overwhelmed they are. That it's their responsibility as well to learn their own signals, but it's also your responsibility as somebody who is in the life of a person with autism to learn to spot those signals and communicate with them about them, and have certain actions that you can do to help them navigate those situations better. That's everybody's responsibility, but it's highly different for everybody. It's there's no set like stereotype. It's so dumb.
Like you're very spot on. I think maybe I'm going to try and just chat quickly about the signs, because this has been such a good episode. It's been so off the rails, which I love, right? Like, it's usually when I come into these, I've got such a structure just in case we can't get a conversation out of it. The goal is always to let the structure fit the conversation.
Yeah.
But this has been such a good one. So just to quickly, for anyone that is not aware, usually we'd say this so much earlier, but it's been so good. Oh, so here are some of the sort of signs of autism from the NHS. So what they say is that autistic people might find it hard to understand what others are thinking or feeling. And bear in mind, what's interesting about the NHS is that, again, it kind of talks to you as though you have autism, or you think you've got autism, or you think you're autistic rather. And again, it talks to you in that way, but it can kind of talk to you as from someone on the outside as well. It's odd. So it says common signs of autism in adults include finding it hard to understand what others are thinking or feeling, getting very anxious about social situations, finding it hard to make friends or preferring to be on your own, seeming blunt, rude, or not interested in others without meaning to, finding it hard to say how you feel, taking things very literally. For example, you might not understand sarcasm or phrases like break a leg, having...
I hate that one.
That's such
it's
a common...
It's... I mean, yes, but I don't think that I don't understand like those things. The majority of the reason why I don't understand sayings and stuff like that is usually because of a language barrier, or just because I'm stupid and I'll be like, yeah, no, I don't know, I didn't know that was like sarcastic or whatever. I'm just a little bit dumb. I'm not understanding sarcasm.
You can be dumb and autistic. It's okay, right?
It's
that's
fine.
allowed.
Break your leg.
But to be fair, like it can like obviously like this is like this might not be something for you, but then other people might experience.
Yeah.
I'm laughing at the example of break a leg, which just it feels like one of those incredibly like almost so common phrases that like you'd learn it if not instinctually, just through people explaining what they mean.
Exactly.
So having the same routine every day and getting very anxious if it changes, not understanding social rules such as not talking over people, avoiding eye contact, getting too close to other people, or getting very upset if someone touches or gets too close to you, noticing small details, patterns, smells, or sounds that others do not, having a very keen interest in certain subjects or activities, liking to plan things very carefully before doing them. So all of these can be present in autistic people, right? That is true. But obviously some of these overlap with other things. And again, these are not diagnostic criteria, right? These are just signs, outward signs that you might see. But you can apply those to something else. For example, getting very anxious about social situations, you could just be
anxiety.
You just have anxiety.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that like, you know, what I'm not trying to invalidate anyone here, but what I'm saying is that really my point here is that the view that we have of these neurodevelopmental disorders generally is very flawed because it doesn't ever address the root cause. I mean, even ADHD, the name like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is that it? That doesn't describe the actual root cause of ADHD or what people with ADHD actually experience. It describes the annoying features of ADHD for people that don't have ADHD.
Yeah, that is true.
Exactly.
Right? It does describe the outward appearance.
Imagine we called autism like can be blunt and doesn't look at me disorder. Right?
It's so stupid. And all of those things that you just described as things that are outward symptoms are like I can link them directly to my experience and to the fact that processing things is difficult. The reason why autistic people have issues making eye contact or not picking up social cues and talking over people is because all of the information is coming in at the same time. And if you're getting overwhelmed and if you're not able to delegate what's important, then you're going to miss those things and you're not going to be able to make those decisions actively. The only way that you can learn to do that is by like being conditioned to appear normal or by wanting to appear normal because it will give you certain benefits and because you notice that people are treated differently because everybody, like autistic people are still human. They still want to be treated well and they will pick up on those things because, you know, we have brain function. So but then again, some people don't pick up on it because of their limitations in being able to pick up on it because they have other things that their brain is preoccupied with. But I always think it's really interesting. The first mention is like understanding other people's emotions. That one is really interesting to me because one of the biggest symptoms that I don't really have trouble with empathy and understanding people's emotions. Nowadays, I did have trouble reading them sometimes when I was younger, but I didn't really have trouble like reading facial expressions or making eye contact as much as, you know, the most typical autistic people would have. But one of the symptoms that I've grown really aware of in the recent past few years or something is the fact that I have trouble identifying my own emotions a lot, and I still don't know whether that's a side effect of cognitive behavioral therapy being really harmful and trauma that arose from that, or it's my autism itself. It's something called alexithymia, and a lot of autistic people apparently struggle with this as well, but nobody knows where it comes from. Nobody knows whether it's because of the way that autistic people are treated in society, or because of autism itself that we have trouble identifying our own emotions and feelings.
It's really interesting that you bring that up, because I'll get onto this in a second. It's sort of the comorbidities with autism, and what you're saying there about whether this comes from how people are treated in society or whether it is an innate aspect of sort of the disorder itself. I think that's really interesting because obviously you consider yourself disabled, and that is a perfectly valid thing for you to decide for yourself. But there are other people that are autistic that don't necessarily consider themselves disabled, and that's perfectly fine for them. That's their experience. They know that more than anyone else. I think what's interesting is that a lot of these sort of issues, not all of them, bear in mind, a lot of them can be eased just by people treating people in society differently, right? The idea that people need to mask is, I think, a flawed one. By saying everyone needs to fit this specific mold of how people should act, that quite noticeably makes it more difficult for people who need to put in that extra effort just to act in that way. And I think with maybe a less strict sort of viewpoint on that from most people in society, it wouldn't necessarily mean that everyone that's autistic that considers themselves disabled, or everyone with autism that considers themselves disabled, would no longer be disabled. There are still other things. There are still other issues that you could have, but it would definitely, I think, alleviate some of the stress of having to interact with other people, right?
And it would, yes, definitely. If people just understood that, the outward signs of autism a little bit better and were more accepting of it, definitely. But then at the same time, I still mask a lot because I want to make other people feel comfortable. And I'm embarrassed when I don't mask. I get really ashamed when I exhibit outward signs of my autism, because I'm hyper aware of how I present to others and how others present to me as well. And then on top of that, I also have the issue, I had a lot of treatment that was really harmful, where I have been forced to mask, and I've been unlearning a lot of things that help with my autism, for example, stimming, self-stimulation, which everybody does to be able to soothe themselves, whether it be in a neurotypical or a non-neurotypical way. I've been actively unlearning that. I've been taught to unlearn it because that's the treatment that I got. And that's the treatment that was really popular around that time for people with autism. But now I can't learn to stim again because I would be embarrassed if I had to, because I've internalized ableism. And if I were to do a lot of the things that I used to do when I was younger, I would be embarrassed to do that. And now and that's really stupid, because I wouldn't look down on somebody else for exhibiting any of those behaviors. So why would I look down on myself for that? But that's just because I have my own screwed up idea of, oh no, I'm not that autistic in my head. And that's really toxic and really awful of me, of course. But I still can't look at it any other way. I really struggle with that a lot of the time, because it makes me judgmental towards my own autism and others' autisms as well. And I hope that I can become better with that, but I doubt that in my lifetime there will be any form of therapy or help that I can really actively unlearn that with, and that's kind of scary. Because the side effects that I get from it as well are unfortunately really harmful. Because I'm not able to stim anymore, I more quickly melt down, and when I melt down now, I exhibit stims that are more dangerous to other people and to myself, because I start pressing in my eyes and I start hitting myself or hitting other people. The other one doesn't happen as often, thankfully, but it's if they cross the line of fire, then I can't help it. But I've injured myself a lot of the times, and with my stimming, and that happened in public as well. And with my public job, this can be really, really embarrassing because it will happen at like conventions. It will happen in front of followers that come to meet me, and I'll just be sitting there like with bruises on my face or on my head because I've been hitting myself, and people would just be scared and confused. And I've actually like I've been at a point where I've had blacked out visions on this part of my face because I was just hitting myself on that side of my head so much, and that's all because of harmful therapy. And that stuff is so upsetting. It's so bad. The understanding of autism in general needs to grow in that sense, because hopefully we can stop that stuff from developing nowadays. And stimming is, I think, a little bit more accepted, thankfully, because of platforms like TikTok, because we're talking a lot about the toxic side of it. But I hope that we can continue that part of it at least, because that's one of the really good things about it.
I think the really great thing about TikTok, and I think so I keep on saying that it's sort of multifaceted. I think you're hitting on two things here. But before I say what I'm going to say, can you give a sort of more a definition of stimming for anyone that might not understand what it is?
Stimming is any sort of, it happens a lot with people with neurodivergent disabilities or whatever, or not disabilities, neurological disorders. There we go. I can't speak. But everybody does it, like neurodivergent or not. It's self-regulating behavior in order to get rid of any form of panic or anxiety that arises from whatever stimuli that you get. So kind of
like self-soothing people, basically.
But it's not necessarily always soothing. Like sometimes it's just like letting go of energy, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah.
Because I think soothing doesn't accurately describe it for me, especially when I'm hitting myself. But also, like, I think for a lot of people when they're rocking or something like that, which is a very common stim for a lot of people, or when they're humming or something, it's not necessarily something that they do to soothe. It's just another form of input that can drown out other inputs or can help them, feel like there's just some sort of balance to them. It's, for me, what could be considered a stim is being like sitting in a corner so that I don't have stimulus from the outside. From like, I just know that I'm safe from that angle, if that makes sense. That for me is a form of stimming technically, but it might not fall under that umbrella for a lot of people. But in my case, it prevents me from having to process information from that side. And the same thing when I'm covering my eyes, like I'm stimming in that way, even though, it's not as typical. It's still a form of stimming. It can take any sort of shape or form.
So like broadly some kind of sensory input that is done
by yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So like, you can look up stimming toys like online, and I think so this is what I was going to say. There's like two parts to this really. Is that first, TikTok absolutely great for normalizing a lot of this stuff, like fidget toys, which I think could kind of fall under stimming in some cases. Fidget toys, amazing. I love that I have them now. They are the best thing that has ever happened to me, because I can now sit on a video call and not break things on my desk because I'm
clicking a pen constantly.
Oh my God.
I do that so much.
When I used to work in an office, the worst thing the worst thing that would happen is I'd be shaking my leg, and there was this one woman in the office, like the office manager, who would always have a go at me for doing it. And I'm like, okay, well now I'm not working because I'm focusing on keeping my leg from moving. So I can either do my work better than anyone in the office, or true.
The shame.
And
all it costs you is a little shaky leg.
Yeah, like I could do it, or I could keep my leg still. I cannot do both. You decide which one it is. So like I think that's the really great aspect of TikTok, normalizing a lot of these sort of behaviors and helping people understand the sort of not from the outside why it's like irritating or frustrating or difficult to like interact with people, but more from the internal, like, okay, what is the experience? And people, I think that's what's really good about it, is that people have this view of autism, and then they see people on TikTok saying, well, actually autism isn't this thing that you think, it can be this, and they're like, oh well, maybe that's me, and that's a great thing, right? If it can then result in someone who like wouldn't have been diagnosed getting a diagnosis, or someone who was struggling less. Obviously, the counterpoint to that is that it could also result in people that don't have this disorder, claiming that they do have this disorder and muddying the waters, blah blah blah. But we won't get into that more than we already have. And I think the other thing that you kind of brought up that you really hit on was the fact that a lot of treatment for autism, I mean, I guess historically, but still nowadays, which is really worrying, is basically taking an autistic person and trying to shove them into the mold of a neurotypical person and saying that you've fixed them. Because what frustrates me about that, and I think what's really evident in sort of your experience, is that doesn't result in a better quality of life for the person. It results in a better. It results in everyone else around them maybe finding it a bit easier to interact with them, which is like a really odd way to treat people.
Yeah.
Like imagine if you treated, say, anxiety or depression, right? So let's say someone's depressed and like they talk about being sad all the time. You're like, man, that's a bummer. Go to CBT, and what CBT will do for you is tell you to shut the hell up about how you
Zip your
feel.
mouth up.
I can't tell you're depressed anymore. You're cured.
Okay, anytime you want to tell someone how sad you are, shut up. Just shut up.
Yeah.
And then you're cured.
That's
And that was the
literally
treatment.
most of the treatment.
Yeah.
It's appearing normal and not being in anybody's way. That's literally the treatment for people with autism still, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I mean, I mean, it's frustrating that is the case. I mean, there's also some treatments. The NHS is quite good for information on this, I think. It's fairly solid most of the time. There are problems with it, obviously, but it's fairly solid. So they actually do have a section on fake treatments for autism, which I think is fantastic because, again, there's so much misinformation around autism. And that's again why I know people are going to be in the comments saying, and if you're going to be in the comments saying this, that this episode isn't scientific enough, okay, we'll do another one, which is more about the science, but like we need to lay all this groundwork first. Like this isn't our only autism episode.
Yeah.
There are probably going to be quite a few.
Yeah, we're doing a qualitative study first.
Yeah.
In order to design a quantitative study later.
But yeah, I genuinely think that without like the science, the context of the science, like the hard science that I want to get into and the history of it is not going to make sense unless we have the conversation that we're having right now first. So some of these sort of fake treatments or cures for autism, the NHS lists to, and this is really going to make you think, how bad does the situation need to be for the NHS to have a page? Literally, when you go to the NHS page for autism, there are a bunch of different links linking you to like, oh, what are the signs of autism? What about children with autism? Blah, blah, blah. One of them is fake treatments. You don't have that for many other things. Like there is a lot of misinformation around this. So some things that don't work and some can be harmful. Special diets such as gluten-free or ketogenic diets, vitamins, minerals, and diet
It's the
supplements.
bread.
Yeah.
Bread is making you not want to talk to people.
Bleaching,
Oh
which is
my gosh.
also called chlorine dioxide or mineral miracle solution, which is MMS. An injection made from blood cells, medicines, including medicines used to help with memory, change hormone levels, or remove metal from the body. Neurofeedback, where brain activity is checked by putting those sticky things on your head, and you're taught how to change it. And also hyperbaric oxygen therapy. You put someone in a chamber and you pump it full of oxygen so the oxygen concentration is good and high, and that'll kick the autism right out of you. Just to breathe it out.
There's there was a big campaign saying that milk causes autism.
Oh yeah.
Which I drank milk as a kid, but
Well, there
my
we are.
sister
It's
did
true.
too, and she's not
Conclusive
autistic.
proof.
It's so weird. It's so upsetting.
It's because we've
then
established
every
that,
Dutch person would just be autistic, I think.
we've
We drink a
established
lot
that
of
you have
milk here.
This is why Margaret Thatcher took away all of the milk
to stop the
to
autism.
stop all the autism.
Yeah. Well, this is really a thing
Thatcher,
that we
Thatcher,
could.
autism snatcher.
We could do a whole episode on the history of autism and then obviously misconceptions around autism, because there are a lot, and not just misconceptions, I should really say misinformation, because autism unfortunately is this thing that all of these sort of crunchy parents, you know what I mean by crunchy parents?
No.
Parents that the parents that shop at Whole Foods, the very natural parents, the parents
What?
that don't give their
Yeah.
kids processed foods.
I get you.
The parents that are anti-preventative medical treatment.
Oh.
Yes.
A lot of
Well, I mean, there's natural food parents, and the Venn diagram of parents who feed their children all natural food might also cross over people who
Big overlap.
not entirely cross over.
Oh, no,
with
not
people who-
entirely. Big
yeah.
overlap.
So
Big
people
overlap.
who distrust medical information and also feed their children exclusively natural food.
So the people that so there's a subset of the people that feed their kids like sort of the all natural food and
Yeah.
avoid processed stuff, avoid chemicals, right?
Yeah.
And this is what I want to be clear about. It's not just people that feed their kids a healthy, natural diet.
Yeah.
It's people that specifically think that they're being better by being natural and
Yeah.
not giving their kids chemicals, which is inherently anti-science. Because everything is chemicals, and if
We
you
are
didn't-
chemicals.
If you didn't feed your kid chemicals, your child would be dead. Please give your kid chemicals; they need them, or they will be dead.
Yes.
They do.
Oh, dear.
They need them. No, so there's these parents that are like, you know, very much like all natural, all this stuff, and autism is seen as this almost plague or fake disease or thing that is.
It's a scapegoat. They just use this as like a tool to prove that what they're doing is better and is right.
Yeah.
And most of the time it's in really harmful ways, and it's limiting these often children that are very disabled and need proper assistance in order to push an agenda that's completely unrelated to autism in the first place.
Yeah. I mean,
It's
I think
scary.
I think a lot of parents, a lot of those kinds of parents, and don't get me wrong, I have so many problems with like parents of autistic children. So many problems with parents of autistic
Sorry,
children.
you have.
Just
Please clarify.
No, I will. No, because not all parents of autistic
hate them
children.
all.
I hate them all. Ugh. But what I mean is that those parents of kids that have autism or like autistic kids, there's two different kinds of these parents. There's one kind of parent that uses their autistic child as like look at like you'll probably have a TikTok where it's like living with Dion, and it's like about how special their child is and how amazing their child is, even though they have the autism. It doesn't mean that it's like stop.
Yeah.
Stop.
Oh, it's so
You're
annoying.
not treating your child like a person. And they clearly don't understand. They understand autism literally from the aspect of how the child sort of interact with other people rather than how the child experiences things, right? And that's what frustrates me on that front. There's also the parents who have a kid, they're like, my child is normal, and then the child is like 2 years old, and then they seemingly start to regress. They don't. That's just like when you're 2, that's generally when like the sort of signs of autism start to show. And then they look for any bloody reason they can for why their child is autistic. And they want to fix their child because they don't want their child to be autistic, because autism bad, I guess. And so they go down this like anti-science route, because if you go down the science route, you find out, well, actually, if anyone is at fault for your child being autistic, it's your genetics. So you know, like there's nothing you can do, and your kid is fine. Like you just need to make some accommodations.
Just autistic.
Yeah, like yeah, exactly. They don't like that, so they go down this anti-science route, and then that's when they start getting into sort of anti-preventative medical treatment, and anti sort of like, you know, chemicals and all of these things, and that's what frustrates me. And it's autism has, for almost the entirety of its sort of its existence as a sort of a condition that can be diagnosed, has been this, as you say, Laura, this scapegoat that people just shove things onto.
It's either they're overtly positive or negative about it.
Yeah.
Like they praise their children to be like little like kid geniuses and like so special, and they're like, oh yeah, they're really disabled, but they can do these lovely things because of their autism. Or they're like, they make my life hell because they're autistic and I'm the victim of this situation. It's never they're just a kid that has a specific set of issues. Like, and that's the way that it really is. Like, obviously, there's people that are now like understanding it more and educating people on it more. But I just see like those two extremes. And even my mom has had a tremendous amount of growth to go from, you know, seeing it as like this burden to then like understanding it as like a special thing that comes with like, what's the word? It's like inspiration porn, I guess.
Yeah, God, yeah.
It's like the oh, look at them, they're able to do this despite being autistic, or because they're autistic sometimes as well. That's equally harmful, because it sets up people to have incredibly high expectations from kids that are just unrealistic. Like you can't, like they're either supposed to be really handicapped or they're supposed to be these kid geniuses and like excel.
It's like, where are the normal
we are
autistic
just,
people, right?
Yeah, can we just like be normal? Can I like, I felt wrong for being like having the diagnosis Asperger's at the same time, like when I was younger, and having a low IQ of 124, which is below average for the diagnostic criteria for Asperger's at the time. I felt really stupid. I was like, why did I get like this diagnosis? But why did I get the good stuff that I'm supposed to get with it? Why can't I suddenly, like, if somebody drops a box of matches, why can't I immediately tell how many matches there are on the ground from like just looking at it? Like, I thought that was something wrong with me in that case. And I was disappointed in myself. And then I thought, oh, in order to be a good autistic person, I'm supposed to excel. And unfortunately, I am now in a position where people look at me, and because I'm making artwork, they're like, oh, because of her autism, she's really good at drawing these details and like and drawing in a way that she doesn't, like she's excelling at social media, and she has this cool, like amazing job because she's autistic. Like people correlate those things with each other, and I constantly have to tell people like, maybe my autism had some influence in a way that I'm able to focus or like see things, but I don't know. Maybe without my autism, I might have just as well been just as good at drawing as I am today. I still rolled out of the womb being able to barely hold a pencil and draw something coherent. I think I have a drawing from when I was 2 years old that's supposed to be Birds and Ernie, and I don't know why both of them are green and blue, but they are.
Abstract
now,
color, working with that at such an
so.
early age. Wow.
Oh my God.
Prodigy.
So talented.
It must be the
Prodigy.
autism. Like,
but yeah, that's the thing. Like now people look at who I am today and they're like, oh yeah, clearly it's the autism that has gotten her where she is. So she should be more thankful about it. And they use it as like an inspiration point thing.
Yeah, people do that about,
and that's so frustrating. Ugh.
People do that about positive representation, don't they? They go like, oh, this person's only on this panel because they're this racial minority, and then, but it's like, well, are they there because they're the racial minority, or they're there despite because they weren't held back?
It's difficult because I've definitely seen people, and I've been on the end of this, where I've definitely had groups of people that have tried to push me into things where I have no business being, purely because they didn't think it was racially diverse enough.
Sure.
However, I know that the organizer of said event was not very happy with that, and I had a conversation about specifically that, about like people being put where they don't belong just to make it more diverse. And my point is, if someone doesn't deserve to be there, they shouldn't be there. You should be working to find people who deserve to be there. Because there are people that deserve to be there. You shouldn't just be bringing in people as a token to up your diversity. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. But realistically, I think the actual problem of people being forced into places where they don't deserve to be is not really that common at all to be much of a worry, right? Like if any demographic is like somewhere where they don't deserve to be, it's cis-het white men. Like I'm gonna be totally honest. Like if you're looking for someone who is in a position of power or in some position where they probably deserve it less than someone else, it's the people who are benefiting from the privilege of not having any of those sort of identities specifically holding them back. Yeah,
neurotypical cis-het white men.
Neurotypical cis-het white men. Like and specifically because of the way our society is set up, that like there is a lot of nepotism. And it can be easier to get ahead if you are like, if you don't have any of those other things holding you back, like you know, being black. Ooh, it's gonna hold you back,
Speaking
buddy.
Speaking of nepotism, there's a whole lot of people, like a lot of autism parents, putting their little autism label on their kids to make them special and to give them little benefits. I really hate that. Like that's maybe even worse than like spreading misinformation or like self-diagnosis or forcing diagnostics onto people, is parents of children like diversifying their children by putting like a little neurodivergent label on them. And that's something that I still get accused of nowadays, is like, oh, you're really comfortable with the label autism because it makes you special and it makes you like appear more diverse. And I'm like, I didn't go to live in a care home. I didn't endure trauma.
Just for that label.
If I live in this care home, it
feel
might
more
make it easier.
diverse.
Just hold
Dude,
on
like,
out. We're going to get a real good label in a
The
few
shit
years.
that
Don't
I
need
went
to do
through.
it.
People will think I'm so special once I'm out of here. Like, I'll just
Yeah,
fake
this
being
was all
autistic
part
for
of
a
the
bit.
grand
And
scheme.
Wow.
Instagram didn't exist yet. Like, my job didn't exist
You
yet, but I
played
was
such a
already
long
planning ahead.
game.
you
Laura.
played the long game, really.
Yeah, really
Wow.
smart.
Man, at 2 years
I was-
old, you must have been real bright to think up this plan, really.
It's going to pay off one day.
But I
That
think
was my autism doing it. Actually, without my autism, I wouldn't have been bright enough to be thinking
you
that
were
plan of it
just
too.
autistic enough to be smart enough to fake it.
Yeah.
But oh my god, but not
Absolutely.
autistic enough to deserve the label. I get
Dear
it.
God.
I do. This is something I'm curious about to ask you.
Mhm.
So people often talk about like people often talk. I think the one thing I want to say is that autism is neither good nor bad necessarily. It just is like
Is.
like a lot of
Mhm.
things. It just is. And the way that you were talking, it seems that people speak to you as though they want to separate you from like autism. And I think, and this is definitely something I've heard from like a kind of large group of autistic people. And I'm curious if your thoughts on this is that a lot of people feel like, well, separating myself from this is not necessarily possible because where does it start? Where do I start and
kind
where
of
does
is
it
me.
end? Right?
To a big degree,
yeah.
yeah.
And I know I've noticed that with people with ADHD as well, wherein they're like, where are the like? I have ADHD,
Yeah.
and that has like affected my personality,
Yeah.
influenced like the way I interact with the world.
Yeah.
I can't just take that away and then
What-
Yeah.
still be
Yeah.
a whole person that is like that isn't
Yeah.
influenced by it because it's influenced me for my whole life.
What part of me has ADHD
Yeah,
not affected, you know?
right, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's difficult because I still have to actively practice to separate it from myself sometimes.
Mhm.
It's interwoven into every part of who I am and my whole experience. And without my autism, I wouldn't be myself. So I also say I am autistic. I don't really say like I have autism.
Mhm.
I mean, I say I have autism just because of linguistical reasons,
Yeah.
but I don't mind putting my disability in front of me, you know, if that makes sense. Like, I'm an autistic person, totally fine with that.
You're not too worried about
I
person
know
first
that-
language.
Yeah, exactly. I don't care about that. I think either is fine. I think it's really annoying that people like make such a big fuss about it because I'm still a person with autism,
Mhm.
but I'm also fine with people saying you're an autistic person. Like, cool. For me personally, it doesn't make a difference. I just personally use autistic person first because I do think it's a big part of who I am. But the difficult thing about separating myself from my autism is sometimes it is necessary in order to be able to function because I have to figure out whether I made a mistake or I hurt somebody intentionally or unintentionally because of who I am or because of my autism. And but at the same time, everything is so part of it. I can't separate it. So yeah, it's hard. Like the only times that I actually have to separate it actively are when I have to check with myself whether what I'm doing is influenced by who I am or because of my disability.
Mhm. That's
Or
interesting.
my autism.
I think this is a really interesting place to end. And, I would love to have you back on for another episode at some point if we do another episode.
Absolutely.
on this.
Yeah.
But
There's so much that we could talk about.
it's
Right?
almost too much.
Mhm.
And yeah, for anyone that is perhaps disappointed that we didn't cover enough science, just complain about it in the comments, and I'm sure you'll complain about it nicely, please. I'm sure you'll get another.
We'll let you know
episode.
when the next one's out.
If you want more, and if you want me back for it as well,
Mm.
then we can talk about more science. 'Cause
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I do fit that stereotype. I love science.
Fantastic.
that
So
is
do
an
we.
autism stereotype. I used to have like all the Nat Geo like magazines, and I would just read like all the facts. Like a lot of autistic people like love the little facts and like hold on to unnecessary information. Apparently, that's a side effect. I don't know if that's a stereotype. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's just whatever. It just happens a lot. But I would be very keen to be part of it again if that's something that you want to cover. Otherwise,
Absolutely.
please do get other people with autism on as well because they're so different, and
Yeah.
I might you know, there might be somebody else with autism that is a little bit more sciencey than I am. But that's so interesting. There's so much to talk about, and I'm really happy that I was able to sit on here, by the way. Thank you for having me.
Ah,
Well, thank you. Well,
It's
Thank
such
you for
an
coming
interesting topic.
thank you very much. We're not quite done yet. We've got one
No.
thing left. It's the quick fire quiz.
Dun, 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 dun.
Uh-oh.
Autism edition.
So it's very simple. The rules are very straightforward. What will happen is I will ask one question. It's one question between the three of us, and the first person to buzz in with the correct answer after I finished asking the question wins. Jamp, what did he win?
Okay.
Nothing.
You goddamn right. Luke, what is your buzzer?
Ah.
Jamp, what is your buzzer?
Quack.
Laura, what is your buzzer?
Oh God, I'm really bad under pressure.
Weird buzzer.
Beep.
Okay.
That's your buzzer. Oh God, I'm really bad under pressure. Beep. Fantastic.
I'll
So
just
the
do
question-
a beep.
The question
struggle?
is, when was Asperger's and other autism spectrum disorders combined into just autism spectrum disorder?
I forgot.
Ah.
Luke.
2017.
No.
Oh.
Jamp.
2016. 13.
Oh, okay. 2013.
I remembered, but only because Corey said it earlier. I
Well,
think-
buzz in, give the
2013.
answer.
No, but I didn't know the exact date. I just know 2013 now.
Oh,
because
ding,
you
ding,
said-
ding.
There you go. Beep.
Hooray.
It's time to thank our patrons because our patrons voted for this episode topic. Also, a patron chose this episode topic for the vote. If you want to do that, head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/SCI Guys, where you can get things like bonus episodes, a brand new podcast called After Dark. You can also get to vote on episode topics like this one. You get to choose episode topics. There's plenty of cool stuff. Also, there's fun little clips that you get every now and then. It's very nice. It's very nice. Is it nice?
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Oh, nice.
So let's thank our patrons. First off, I want to thank Tindra Wall Erickson.
Thank you to Kylo.
Thank you, Shane Magara.
Thank you, the Blob Master.
Oh, thank you, the Blood Master. Thank you to Maeve Rice.
Thank you, Noah's Away.
Thank you to Melissa Perez.
And thank you to Jewel.
Very nice.
Just
very
one Jewel.
Yeah, very low energy there, but
Yeah.
makes sense. Just one jewel.
Just one.
Well, that is it for today. Thank you very much for joining us. Laura, where can people find you?
They can find me on Instagram and Twitter as Cyarine, Cyarine, because there's an E at the end, because Cyarine was taken. And other places if you just type it without an E on the internet.
Fantastic. Well, before we go, we'd like to thank all of our patrons with a very special thank you to executive producer Rosa Rodriguez. And thank you for watching. You can find the full references for this episode in the description. Subscribe for new episodes every Sunday, and why not leave us a nice wee comment? You can support the pod over at patreon.com/SciGuys, or you can find and contact us at SciGuysPod on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, here on YouTube, and at SciGuys on TikTok too, or at SciGuys.co.uk. Or you can send us an email at sciguyspod@gmail.com.
That's SciGuysPod@gmail.com.
SciGuysPod.
At gmail.com. You can follow me at Not Corey everywhere.
You can follow me at Jampkin everywhere.
You can follow me at Luke Cupforth everywhere.
You can follow me at Cyarine. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah!